I'm Dustan Biegler, and I'm the CEO at Apple Roofing. I guess to tell you guys a little bit about me, my background is I started roofing in high school, and as soon as I was 18, I started my own company, right? I basically, no genius, didn't have any real education that made me special or anything like that, right? I was a high school dropout. I started roofing because that's what I was already in, right? Like I was already working for a general contractor. One of my biggest fears in life, I think, is going through life and not finding out what your limits are, right? I think we all are born with that, what am I really capable of in this life? And we really don't know when we start, right? Maybe we go as far as we can see right now. It's like climbing a mountain, right? You go as far as you can see, and then you can see further. A lot of that, I think, as entrepreneurs, I've talked to a lot of them, right? And we all tend to do a lot of multitasking because, if anybody was in the class last year, we really talked about when you start your company, you're wearing all the hats, right? You're doing the marketing, you're doing the sales, you're doing the accounting, you're doing everything. And you're just rapid fire change. And when you multitask, it causes a high error rate. It doesn't allow you to ever really focus on something and get really good at it. When I think of focus, I always use the analogy of Henry Ford, right? Henry Ford created that production line, and it made the output of production be something the world's never seen, right? And some of those people are just turning a screw and then it goes to the next guy, right? It's crazy, but they get really fucking good at turning the screw. And it's right every time, right? The error rate is super low. So when you look at your business, ask yourself, we really try to break things into silos. And I'm gonna use an example. Even our sales department. We take our sales department and we go, okay, who are they selling to? Right? Because every customer is a little bit different, right? But I'm talking of categorizing them into a retail salesman, an insurance salesman, new construction, multifamily, right? Because all of the needs are different. And so we don't have a new construction guy go to sell an insurance job. And we don't have an insurance guy go sell a new construction job, right? We really silo them out so they can get really good at that. What we found earlier on was if you have an insurance guy that services new construction, he makes these relationships with builders and things are going really well, right? And then the hailstorm hits and he's kind of ignoring that guy and he's focusing on this hailstorm, right? And then the next year the guy's well, dude, you dropped off the earth and now you got to start that whole relationship over again, right? So when you think as much as you can, as much focus as you can create in your business, it doesn't matter what role we're talking about, whether it's the bookkeeper, the salesperson, the sales manager, look at the activities they're doing and try to break those down into really, I guess, take as many hats off as you can on each person and yourself. When people leave an organization, it's because they didn't have upward mobility in that organization usually. When people go want to start their own company, it's because they couldn't see a future with yours, right? And it's back to that extreme ownership. If you got people leaving your organization, don't blame it on the people. Look at yourself again, right? And say, hey, why are people leaving my organization? Why aren't they seeing the value, right? Rodney just kind of talked about that in his thing, and I buy into that. Try to make millionaires in your own company, right? That's what you want to do. Who doesn't love writing a big check to their people, right? That's one of the things we really love. We've got our business structured so we have bonus systems and things like that. And I love being able to go out and write a big check. When somebody accomplishes something great, I love being able to hand that out, in front of the whole sales team and create a dopamine dump, right? Everybody gets a little high off that. So the other thing about wanting to grow, everybody said they wanted to grow in here. And And the reason I think we want to do that, right, as owners, besides providing upward mobility for our people, right, because if they don't see that upward mobility, like we just said, that's when they want to leave. They can't see it as a career. But besides that, we've all, including ourselves, got to feel some sort of progress in our life, right? Tony Robbins talks about this. He says, if you don't have some sort of progress in your life, you don't have happiness. He says progress is happiness. So when people ask him what's happiness, he says progress equals happiness. And that doesn't have to necessarily be in your career, right? It could be progress in your relationship or your family or whatever, right? Like there's a lot of areas in your life you can experience progress, but when somebody doesn't have any progress in their life, that's when they start like feeling depression or, suicidal or whatever, right? Like you have to have some sort of progress in your life. And you can't progress until you replace yourself. So always replace yourself, with somebody in your organization. When people start in our company, I tell them, day one, what I really want for you is I want you to replace me. I want you to take my job, because if somebody can take my job, I can go work on something else, right? Like bigger to grow the company. I think that's a big deal. And really, money, if you have success in your career, it's going to allow you to have success in any other place in your life, right? Like if you're a very charitable person, then now you can be a more charitable person, right? It just amplifies who you are. We really try to specialize right down to even into the sales department. The more you can specialize, the more success that people are going to experience within your company. So if you look at the sales part of this, like, for example, a retail insurance salesman cannot go sell property management, right? And vice versa. Or a new construction person can't go sell an insurance job or a retail job, right? Like the needs are different, And if you want people to really perform really well in their space, as you grow, you can start specializing more and more and more, right? Because think about it as an owner right now, like you're handling so many things between marketing and, SEO and operations, right? Like there's nothing that you feel like you can't say you're doing the best that can be done at anything, right? Because you simply don't have time to be the best at everything. As soon as you start getting specialists in place, they can start being the best in their space, okay? I think it was 2 years ago, Marcus and I were talking about new goals, and we were like, okay, in 5 years, we want to get to 100 million, right? And it seemed like this big undoable thing, right? And maybe we couldn't see over the fall summit yet, but it was like this big goal we had. And the way that we thought we were going to do it was by mergers and acquisitions, right? And so we went down that road and found out, through a little trial and error that, hey, you know what? We don't have the skills that it takes to do these mergers and acquisitions at the speed and the effectiveness that we want to do them. And I'm not sure if anybody knows this, 3 months ago, we did our first merger with Crest Exteriors, right? So that puts us around 80 million, and we think we're going to close on another one before the end of the year. That is, going to be putting us up towards 90, 95 million, right? So it's super cool that we're going to get to our goal faster than we thought. But one of the things we recognized in time was that, hey, we didn't have the skills to do it, And I think when you look at wherever you're at in your company and wherever you want to be, you want to ask yourself, like, okay, what roles am I missing, right? What holes do I need to fill? What skills do I need, right? Because you probably have a fairly well-rounded team if you're at 10 million. But, some of the guys that are maybe at 2 million or what have you, they don't have that like sales manager yet, or they don't, you know what I mean? And so you have to say, okay, Who's good at that? Who would be that good fit? And then figure out how to get that person on your team. And that can depend on how big your goal is. That might look really different, right? For us, well, I'm going to go back to when I partnered up with Marcus. I couldn't hire Marcus because I knew Marcus since we were kids. And Marcus is an entrepreneur. I knew he was an entrepreneur. He's always been that way. And I knew, like, okay, you might be able to hire Marcus, but he ain't going to stay forever. He eventually is going to be his own guy, right? So my only way to get that skill into my company was to say, hey, dude, let's be partners, right? I knew that I had something he needed and he had something that I needed. And so it worked really well. A leading indicator is something like, how many sales are we going to do next month, right? That's a little tougher question than like looking back at what already happened. But the important thing about it is when you look at that, you're able to affect it when you derail yourself, right? You start to recognize, hey, it doesn't look like I'm going to hit my goal. And so what the things like you need to know in order to like answer that question might be, hey, what's my historical close rate, right? Because you want an educated guess, not just a guess of what your next month's sales look like. So if you know you've been closing at 30%, right, of prospects or whatever, then, you know, if your goal is 100,000, then you need at least $300,000 in your prospect line, right? And if you only have 200,000 in there, you can divide that by 30 and go, hey, you know what? We don't have enough revenue to meet goal. Like now that triggers you go, we need to go work on creating more revenue, right? Now you can affect the outcome and not just see the outcome when it happens, right? It's going to give you triggers to make you go take the action that you need to take in order to reach your goal. Does that make sense? Right? I mean, going back to when you were the original founder and you were doing all the roles, as soon as you hired that receptionist, you handed off a hat, right? Like, I no longer have to answer incoming phone calls, right? So you've just narrowed your focus down a little bit more, right? So as you continue to grow, I think that's why large companies can become very efficient, right? And I say can. They don't always, but they can be because you're able to have the resources to really create experts at each role, okay? I mean, I've been in an accountant firm, our accountant firm, and they have something like 400 accountants, right? And I've noticed why I'm in there, like, okay, you got like this kind of tax, this kind of tax, this kind of tax. You got to talk to 4 or 5 different people depending on what kind of tax we're talking about, right? If it's multi-state, you got a person for that. If you've got equipment things, you know, there's a person for that, right? If you want to talk to somebody about tax strategies, it's a person for that, right? So they don't, I actually feel a little bit like I kind of want one throat to choke, you know, sometimes, right? But the reality is when I go to somebody, I know the advice they're giving me on that topic is very solid because that's all they do, right?